On July 11, 1995, Bosnian Serb forces, led by General Ratko Mladic, began a systematic killing of nearly 10,000 Bosnian Muslim, sometimes referred to as Bosniaks, men and boys in the area of Srebrenica, a small town located about halfway between the Bosnian capital of Sarajevo and the Serbian capital of Belgrade. Widespread ethnic violence in what had been Yugoslavia led to the outbreak of the largest armed conflict in Europe since the end of World War II, since eclipsed by Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The horrific images beamed worldwide on news programs, newspapers, and magazines shocked the world, bringing back memories of the Holocaust and the outbreak of World War I in 1914, which began in the same region. Along with the nearly 4-year-long siege of Sarajevo, the massacres at Srebrenica reminded the world that despite its modernity and sophistication, Europe still struggled with its dark past, which was made worse with the most modern weapons and technology. Welcome to A Day in History. Thank you for joining us. Today, we bring you the tragic story of the Srebrenica massacre during the Balkan Wars of the 1990s. You'll sometimes hear a word on the news or history books: Balkanization. Balkanization occurs when a larger state breaks down into smaller states, usually hostile to each other. The Balkan Peninsula is the large region to the southeast of Austria, across to the Black Sea, and south to the borders of Greece and European Turkey. The Balkan countries are Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Croatia, Kosovo, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Romania, Serbia, and Slovenia. Serbia claims Kosovo, but most nations around the world, except for Russia and its allies, recognize it as an independent state. Greece is sometimes listed as a Balkan country as well. For centuries, warlords, kingdoms, and empires fought over the rugged landscape. Romans, Huns, Magyars, Turks, Russians, Germans, the list goes on and on. In the late 1300s, the Ottoman Turks began to expand into the Balkans and controlled much of the region by the last half of the 1400s. One of the lasting results of the Turkish occupation, which lasted in various forms until the late 19th century, was the conversion of many people in Bosnia to Islam, which, as you might imagine, brought religious conflict into the region. With tensions high between the westward-looking and Catholic Croatians or Croats and the eastward-looking Orthodox Serbs, the introduction of a large number of Muslims in the area only increased tension in what was to become Yugoslavia in the early 20th century. By the late 1800s, the Ottoman Empire was in decline and had begun to be driven out of the Balkans. Wars of independence, questions of economic insecurity and corruption, and the industrial power of the Austro-Hungarian Empire meant that the area was in an almost constant state of flux before World War I. It was in Sarajevo, the capital of the Austro-Hungarian province of Bosnia, that Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife were assassinated in June 1914 by Serbian nationalists linked to a militant nationalist wing of the Serbian government, which wanted Bosnia for their own. World War I began in Bosnia. After the war, negotiations at the Palace of Versailles outside Paris formed the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, or Land of the South Slavs. The problem with Yugoslavia was that its borders were artificial and contested. Within each of the Yugoslavian states lived significant minorities from the other states. On top of all that, the newly crowned King of Yugoslavia was a Serb, the most numerous and powerful region in the kingdom, which caused controversy and resentment among the other nationalities in the country: Croats, Slovenes, Montenegrins, Kosovar Albanians, Bosnian Muslims, and North Macedonians. A long and complicated chain of events led to the German invasion of Yugoslavia in 1941, which led to a savage guerrilla war that included not only rapidly changing sides and fighting both with and against the Germans, but also among the nationalities of the region, primarily the two largest groups, the Croatians and Serbs, with other groups caught in the middle. Concentration camps and ethnic violence on a massive scale contributed to the nearly 2 million people killed in the country during the war. The war ended with the largest and most powerful group of resistance fighters, the Communist Partisans led by Josip Broz, better known as Tito, who was of mixed Slovene and Croatian heritage. When the Communists took power, their primary goal was to end the ethnic violence that had done nearly as much damage to the country as the Nazis had. And for all intents and purposes, they did. Unfortunately, Tito's government enforced peace between the nationalities with the force of the government, but to a large degree did not address the root problems, especially a formal attempt at reconciliation between the groups, many of whom were nursing grudges not only from the violence of World War II, but from tribal feuds going back centuries. Tito was a powerful and charismatic leader, but had no effective successor when he died in 1980. The organs of the Yugoslav government, primarily the uniformed and secret police and the military, kept the lid on growing tensions between ethnic groups, which included not only plans for revenge, but questions of boundaries, resources, and especially religion. But as the central government weakened, even the police and military began to fracture into paramilitary groups based on ethnicity. By 1988 to 89, ethnic rioting had begun in many parts of the country, mainly between Serbs and Croats, each claiming most or all of Bosnia-Herzegovina. Unfortunately for the nearly 2 million Bosnian Muslims, who comprised about 44% of the country, their homeland lay between Serbia and Croatia. And though the Bosnian ethnic group is made up of both Serbs and Croats genetically, religious hatred trumped the similarity of language and culture. Making things worse, the Catholic Croats and Orthodox Serbs hated each other, but both hated the Bosnian Muslims. Bosnia became a triangle of ethnic warfare beginning in 1991. By 1995, the siege of Sarajevo, predominantly Muslim at the time, was headline news. Men, women, and children lining up for food and water, or simply trying to cross the street, were targets for the snipers of the Bosnian Serb militia and elements of the Serbian army. Thousands died, including nearly 2,000 children. As the siege in the capital continued, Serbian paramilitary troops led by Ratko Mladic and several other violently nationalist Serbian commanders followed the order of self-proclaimed President of Serbian Bosnia, Radovan Karadzic, to create an unbearable situation of total insecurity, with no hope of further survival or life for the inhabitants of Srebrenica, and in March began to press in on the area around Srebrenica, which had been designated a UN safe zone in international negotiations, which the Serbian government, but conveniently not the Bosnian Serbs, had agreed to. Throughout the conflict, the Serbian government in Belgrade, while supporting the Bosnian Serbs financially, politically, and militarily, distanced itself from their brothers in Bosnia, repeatedly saying that Belgrade had no control over what happened in Bosnia, which was a blatant untruth. To avoid being cut off and starved into submission, Bosniak soldiers retreated from the Srebrenica area in late May. A month later, the Serbs mounted a full-scale offensive, and the remaining Bosniak troops, who stayed behind to protect the civilians trapped in the area, could put up little effective resistance, and were either killed in combat or forced to retreat. The war had been going on for about 3 years by this time. Throughout Bosnia, inter-ethnic violence had occurred on a massive scale. Serbs against Croats, Croats against Serbs, and both groups against the Muslims, who were accused of shelling civilian areas and reprisal killings. There was enough violence and finger-pointing to go around, but on July the 11th, the largest massacre of a brutal war began. In theory, it never should have happened. The UN had declared the area a safe zone, and there was a force of 200 Dutch peacekeepers on the roads leading into the area. 200 men were not anywhere near enough to put up a fight against the thousands of well-armed Serb militiamen, but they were supposed to be a deterrent. The thought was that if the Serbs attacked or defied the UN peacekeepers, they would be defying the whole world. and at the very least, harsh sanctions would be put into place. It didn't matter. To the tens of thousands of Bosnian Serb soldiers moving towards Srebrenica, what their General Mladic said to Serbian journalists on camera was enough. "We give this town to the Serb nation. The time has come to take revenge on the Muslims." In the minds of most Serbs, that revenge dated back to World War II, when many Muslims aided the Germans in simply living in their own homeland, which the Serbs considered theirs. During the night of July 11th, a large column of Bosniak troops, nearly cut off in a forest near the town, accepted Serbian promises that they would be disarmed and be escorted to another UN safe zone outside the area. All of this was a lie. The killings began as soon as the Bosniaks laid down their arms. Some were shot on the spot, but many were taken deeper into the woods, not to be seen by any foreign journalists or UN peacekeepers, and not panic the many civilians crowded into and around the town. The following day, the elderly, women, and young children of both genders were loaded on trucks or forced to walk to territory controlled by Bosniak militias. Throughout the 12th and 13th, males over 12 were rounded up and taken in groups to various holding sites, mainly around the nearby town of Bratunac, which was empty of Muslims. Though some of the victims were killed on the night of the 12th, most of the more than 8,000 victims began to be killed on the night of July 13, 1995. Groups varying in size from 50 to 500 were blindfolded, and many bound hand and foot, then taken to various sites, including a large farm in a nearby village, a small soccer stadium, a school, a cultural center, a warehouse, and an isolated sunken dirt road. Victims were shot with everything from pistols to large caliber machine guns. Quite a number of the bodies found afterward had been mutilated, tortured before being shot. It was also discovered that not only did Bosnian Serb forces commit the killings, but several Serbian policemen were on hand. They were filmed by others while executing victims. Accounts and rumors of the massacres began shortly after the killings. With satellite photos, US and NATO military intelligence discovered the digging of mass graves and attempts to hide evidence of the killings. By the fall, international pressure on Serbia, including threats of using NATO air power, forced the Serbians to the negotiating table. On November 21, 1995, the Dayton Accords were signed by all the parties involved, and a complicated mechanism for an independent Bosnia where all ethnic groups would be politically represented was created. However, nothing in the agreement protected perpetrators from possible prosecution at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Despite a report issued by the Bosnian government which stated that nearly 20,000 ethnic Serbian troops had played some role in the Srebrenica massacre, just under 30 were ever indicted and sentenced. Radovan Karadzic, the Bosnian Serb president, was sentenced to 40 years on charges including genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. He is still alive and behind bars. Ratko Mladic, the commander of Bosnian Serb troops, escaped to Serbia, where he hid with aid from Serbian nationalists and his family. By 2011, Serbia had a new, relatively liberal government and was attempting to reintegrate itself into Europe after decades of conflict and tension. Serbian secret police hunted down and captured Mladic, who was taken to The Hague and given a life sentence. Several other Bosnian Serb officers were also indicted, tried, and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. Unfortunately, many of those who played a role in the massacre still lead everyday lives in Serbia. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe for more content like this. See you soon.